This painting is actually a painting that was gifted to us for our research institute. And it's done by a Māori woman artist from the northern tribes in Ngāpuhi. As I said before, we're a tribally based institute. This is where we actually look at this view from our work. We've got 6 staff working with us in our home office, but we run actually quite bigger projects which cover the whole country. And we tend to work with other small Māori institutes around the country and other independent Māori researchers. I just wanted to comment particularly on our definition of health, because not everybody has the same idea when they're talking health. The way we tend to think about health is health in terms of the environment, the earth, the rivers, the lakes, the seas, cultivations, forests, and the people. So we're in a context when we talk about health. Actually, that photograph and the one that follows just comes from a project which we did where we researched some of the traditional walking pathways in our area. And we had to climb all these huge hills because our people used to live on the top of these hills in the old days. We're unfit these days because we live down on the flats, but climbing these hills this particular day was, you'll see I remained on the lower plateau. But we sent the emerging researcher up to the top of the hills. Yeah. So at the same time, we're building knowledge of our own lands, histories, and our health. Those things go together. Where we work, we tend to mentor people wherever we see them. If we catch them at the airport, if we catch them at the marae, if we catch them at a funeral, birthday parties, wherever on the street, we're mentoring. And vice versa, they're mentoring us. And this is just an example again of one of our researchers. He's filming in this particular, at the back. And there he is. And in this particular situation, he's mentoring one of his nephews who was getting into a bit of trouble at school, so he grabbed him and said, "Here, hold the microphone," during the hui. Okay, I think it's really important to think about the fact that we do mentoring for different reasons. It's not always the same reasons, and that academic mentoring is one really good solid part of mentoring, but it's not the whole picture. We're also at the same time, we're mentoring culturally. We're a people who are reviving our culture and reviving our language, and all of us are trying to strengthen ourselves in those pathways. So we help each other where we can culturally. We also are mentoring each other in regard to family and tribal relationships. And those can be very complicated environments to be in, and we can need at times support mentoring in terms of making things easier to work with our relations. We're also mentoring in terms of power, understanding political analysis, and that's absolutely critical in kaupapa Māori research, which is what we do. And if you've read Linda Smith's book, Decolonising Research, then you have some idea of the types of philosophy that underpins our research process. It's very politically aware, and it's very mindful of power relationships and making sure that we attend and try to rebalance those power relationships as we're doing our work. It's also important to mentor in terms of health, that people need to stay healthy in the work they do, and we have all of the high stats that we saw before in terms of high everything, high mental health stats, depression, everything else. Those are the same issues that touch our lives as researchers, and touch our workplaces and our families. So they're complicated environments to work in, and so we have to consciously work on mentoring to be healthy, both ourselves and others. One of the ways in which we mentor our I should say, I don't like using the term junior staff members, but other staff, is that other researchers, is often they need to be mentored in terms of the ways we talk to our own people, and the need to translate complicated academic language into language that's understandable when talking to our people. And we spend quite a bit of time thinking through ways to do that. And I think each of us, even Paul and myself, constantly strive to make our stories, our research, more easily understood, finding ways that are much more interesting for them to consider the questions we're raising. As I said, political aspects are very much part, and I mean, we come from Wanganui, which is known in the country to be sort of an active iwi politically. We've had occupations, we've been involved in quite a bit of political activity. This just happened to be a protest march that was happening in our town over the Māori language. So we were there. The other challenges include, for Māori especially, I think getting beyond a master's degree if you're tribally based. We have this phrase we use, getting lost in the iwi, or getting lost in the tribe. In other words, we say, when people move back to their home areas, they often get lost, and the importance of staying. I think for us, being based in the iwi is really important because we're able to keep on people's cases and keep them motivated to keep going and complete a PhD. It's important. We also mentor in terms of communicating. Communicating is a key thing that a number of our younger researchers struggle with. Talking to both not only home audiences but also speaking to academic audiences, and the need to move in and out of these different audiences. The other important thing, another challenge is the way that we need whānau supportive environments. We need family supportive environments. It's not just enough to mentor and support a student. You also have to be aware of their family circumstances. You also have to understand the issues they're facing. And I had a fantastic supervisor when I was doing my master's. I wouldn't have finished my master's except for the fact that she sent her daughter round to my place, and her daughter picked up my kids, took them away so I could then write in the evenings. And that sort of practical support was the type of thing which got me through at the end of the day. We need, emerging researchers also need to develop their own networks, and this was something one of our researchers said to me yesterday when I rang her up and said, what are the things that you find challenging? And she said, one of the things she found challenging was that Paul and I have all the networks. We know the people around the country. We know all of the high-profile Māori researchers. We can knock on this door, we can talk to this one and ask anything, but she doesn't. And so she found it difficult to get the same access that we did when she needed it for different things, unless she came and asked us. And that's another thing that we need to mentor for, which is to help people to develop networks. I actually personally don't like the term network. It's impersonal, and it doesn't do justice to the types of relationships that we tend to set up. Māori words cover that concept much better in terms of, we use the term whanaungatanga. We use making friends would be actually a better term. because many of those people who we make contact with, they're not just for one single purpose. We may contact them later. People ring us up for all sorts of things, not related to research. They can ring us up because their mother's visiting Wanganui and needs to be picked up from the airport. There's all different ways in which those relationships will get activated later. So networks doesn't quite hit the mark. Our West Coast beaches look like that. They're pretty wild. I think one of the challenges for us is that we find we need, and there's a gap for us in that we need, because we're tribally based, the people we enjoy actually having hui with most are people who are also tribally based. And so some of that lateral mentoring for us is difficult. And the reason for that is because no one funds it and and it's difficult for us to get together. But it's an extremely important part of mentoring, because what we're finding is tribally, we're sort of reinventing the wheel from tribe to tribe. We're not actually making those connections together and sharing our ideas around training, sharing our methods, sharing our methodologies and our research findings. So I would signal that as one gap. And another one is, at the moment, is the need for us to more adequately get together around when we're all working on the same topic. We call it a kaupapa, but when we're working on the same topic, we need to meet each other and we need to talk together. And so there's a bit of isolation going on around some of the research, which needs to be more adequately networked. At the moment, a project that we're working on looking at how Māori prisoners can better reintegrate into the communities. And in that case, we have actually brought all of the Māori prison researchers together. And that's been really fantastic to do that, but it's not very common for it to happen. So again, it's another one of those areas we need to happen in the future. I just want to have a quick talk around whānau mentoring, family mentoring, because this is a photo of my brother getting a doctorate at Victoria University. And usually there's two ceremonies at the universities. There's usually a Māori ceremony and a Pākehā ceremony. This was a Māori ceremony. And I wanted to talk about whānau mentoring in particular, because about a month ago we had our tribe brought together all of the graduates from our tribe. And I think we had about 36 meeting in the room. We've got a list of about 60 of them now. But what was very noticeable was how sitting around the room, particular families had, 4 or 5 graduates. And what was clear in that meeting was that if you can get one Indigenous person through the door from one family, there's a snowball effect in regard to that family. So it's really important, I think, for us to target, to help those first timers. I would say they're a very high needs group, the first time through the door people. And but that was a really good learning for us, I think, to see how those families then got the next generations through the door. Because we're tribally based, we need access to good communication tools, such as video conferencing and so forth, so we can communicate and hui more easily, especially with universities, wānanga and other researchers. At the moment, we don't actually have that capacity. We've got Skype, but so it means that travel costs are quite high, so that's a limiting factor for our researchers. We can also be, when we first set up, I think we ran for quite a few years without any online database support in terms of research, because we couldn't afford the databases, whereas in institutions they come as an automatic right. We tried for years to get universities to give us access to their databases, and it just seemed insurmountable. But I'm pleased to announce that 1 week ago, one of the wānangas, and instead of going through the CEO, we went straight to the librarian and she gave us access immediately. So we're now online with Awanuiarangi. So it leads a valuable lesson, don't go through the top. And I just wanted to finish off with this photograph, because usually to everything I go to, I bring my 7-year-old grandson who I'm raising, and he's on the right there, so I thought I'd better bring him this time and just pop him up there. It's the only thing he hasn't come to with me since I've had him, so I'm missing him, but there he is. So kia ora tātou.
So good afternoon everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to all elders past, present and future. So as an Aboriginal woman, a Yawu woman, I have a vested interest in understanding why some populations are healthier than others and what can be done about it. So in this photo is my daughters and my auntie, and these are the primary reasons I do what I do. I've invested over 14 years in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health research, and I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney, working on addressing disparities in cancer care and outcomes for people with lung cancer. So personally, it's been a long journey to becoming a PhD candidate. I currently work on cancer outcomes, but like many of us here, I've also worked on other programs, including addressing rheumatic heart disease, diabetes, as well as youth health issues. So in this talk today, we're topically going to discuss some of the challenges that emerging Indigenous researchers face, and I'll be discussing this through my own personal experiences. So this is what I've put on the table for today. Do we actually know what we're getting ourselves in for in regards to education and career pathways? We will discuss the challenges of describing the context in which we work, the challenges within research processes and bridging the divide between Indigenous and non-Indigenous processes. And importantly, I also wanted to mention some of the needs of emerging Indigenous researchers. And I'll conclude by reiterating and highlighting some of the challenges that we face. So, being community members, aware of our community issues, do we actually walk into the research realm with our eyes wide open? I think it depends on our household table talk and the people that we're exposed to. For me, I was the first person in my family to complete a degree, and I did not have any knowledge of what the education and career pathways for health research look like. My research journey began a couple of years after completing high school, but it was not until the end of my Certificate 3 that I was made aware of the potential to even go to university and become a researcher. And this was due to meeting my mentor, Joan Cunningham, in 2001. She's guided me through the university and research arenas since, and Joan's informed me of potential opportunities in order to build capacity and knowledge, and she's also assisted me in sourcing funding and meeting up with current and potential collaborators. Without the guidance and support of someone like Joan, I'm not sure I would have moved beyond completing that certificate. And while I do not know what the future holds, I do know that I have a safe space to bounce ideas around and people to guide me if I need it. And this has provided me with the confidence in knowing that I've got someone who's got my back and I'm not in this alone. And so one of the biggest challenges I initially had was being able to describe the work we do. And I wanted to be able to describe the context of Indigenous health research without diminishing the complexity of Indigenous health and ill health. And so I developed this semi-mini framework. And ultimately, research in the Indigenous health arena is about addressing health disparities. And when I use the term disparity, I'm encompassing both inequalities, and that is unavoidable differences in health and disease, as well as health inequities, and that is avoidable differences, which include issues of social injustice and unfairness. So when we address health disparities, we are first identifying what disparities exist and why these disparities exist. And this includes identifying disparities in disease, things like social exclusion, racism, racial discrimination and stigma. And secondly, we also want to know the extent of those disparities. So the prevalence, the incidence, the outcomes, which can tell us the extent of the problem. And then thirdly, we want to know what can be done about it on both population and individual levels. And this encompasses the space of health promotion, intervention research, and translating appropriate research into policy and legislation. And it was particularly important for me to have a basic framework like this that could provide me with an understanding of where the work I undertake and I'm involved in actually fits. So the research process. Indigenous researchers often play the role of research participant, researcher, and negotiator, which means that research processes can be difficult to separate from our personal lives. The Indigenous health research process means conducting research that is culturally acceptable and involves placing Indigenous values at the centre of the research process. Basically, we have the community, the institution, and ethics, which are the foundations of the process. The community provides priorities and direction, the institution provides expertise and logistical support, and ethics provide core values under which to work. While this is very basic, it does identify the need for cultural safety, community engagement, and culturally specific ethical foundations during all stages of the research process. These three factors are exclusive to disparities research, particularly Indigenous research, and can be the source of challenges for emerging researchers when negotiating between the community, the institution, and the ethical bodies. So bridging that divide. It took me a really long time to feel comfortable discussing Indigenous issues with non-Indigenous people. And this was a well-defined challenge for the continuous need to bridge the divide between Indigenous and non-Indigenous research processes. So this means that Indigenous health researchers are expected to have multidisciplinary skills, interdisciplinary skills, cross-cultural and diplomacy skills, which involves working both sequentially and collaboratively with our communities and our institutions. Ultimately, these skills will enable our already identified needs of cultural safety, community engagement, and Indigenous-specific ethical foundations to be met, but the issue still remains that these skills are not necessarily innate within all of us. They need to be learnt. And this is where guidance from experienced Indigenous researchers can be extremely valuable in learning about what approaches work and what don't. So then, what do emerging Indigenous researchers need to succeed? So the Cooperative Research Centre for Aboriginal Health, now called the Lowitja Institute, published a guide for supervising Indigenous researchers in 2009. From this document, there's a section on needs of emerging researchers, and the following needs were identified. Being guided by more experienced researchers, having the opportunities to think and discuss current and propose research, and this includes discussing what's working, what's not, how to apply and use new knowledge, and identifying learning gaps that can be filled. Also, there is a need for opportunities to collaborate with other researchers and institutions on local, national, and international levels. Additionally, emerging researchers need to feel confident within their roles and be provided a culturally safe environment in which to conduct their research. Supervisory and colleague support is necessary for wellbeing at work, as well as logistical support to do the research. Also identified was the need to feel part of a work team and to have adequate funding to undertake and complete the proposed research. In my case, having a successful relationship with my mentor, Joan, has been integral to discussing and fulfilling my needs and tackling any challenges that may arise. So, to recap, some of the challenges that I've been faced with has included an initial confusion of the education and research pathways. I think if I got caught earlier on from around high school onwards, if someone had actually said to me, these are your options, that could have assisted me a lot better. Also, contextualising Indigenous health research, that is, describing the context in which we are working without diminishing the complexity of Indigenous health and ill health. understanding different research processes, as well as learning how to negotiate these processes between the community, institution and ethical bodies. And also, in order to manage the research process across the divide, we're often expected to perform as the middle woman, which requires learned interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary skills. Also, maintaining connection to community is another challenge for emerging Indigenous researchers. In cancer research at the University of Sydney, I'm the only Indigenous candidate in my team and collaborating institutions, and there are 3 of them. I'm also 4,000 kilometres away from my family, which can mean I feel very isolated from both my work colleagues and my community at times. And this creates a need to speak to other Indigenous people about family life and community life. Additionally, I've also included picking the right fights. And so there's a lot of work to be done across Indigenous health. And while this provides opportunity, it can also be extremely overwhelming with the sheer amount of work and options that are presented. So, just finishing, while these challenges exist, there is a clear need for reciprocal, respectful relationships between the researchers, the supervisors, and the supporting institutions in order to foster us Indigenous researchers. That was all I had.
So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the Kulin Nation. And I did some research on the web, so I was hoping that I was correct, and I heard someone else say it, so I did some good research then. I have a postdoctoral fellowship from the CTN, and I also want to acknowledge Dr. Cherryl Bartlett, who is at one of the NEAR centers, which is the Atlantic Aboriginal Health Research Program. The whole NEAR center there is very critical in my academic career. And Cherryl actually gave me a little something to bring today, so I'll be able to show that to some of my my comrades from Canada as well. And I work at the Women in HIV Research Program at the Women's College Research Institute. And I like to say I have really, really great colleagues and wonderful mentors to work with. This is a picture I took. Some people asked me if I went scuba diving. No, I went to an aquarium. So who am I? I actually grew up in a French Acadian community, not too far from the reserve, which is called Burn Church. I'm Mi'kmaq, and I have a doctorate in microbiology and immunology, and some of the work I do involves connecting basic science with social science, which I think is really critical, because at first when I started basic science, I can see the application as a basic scientist, but I think a lot of people can better see the application as a social science. So I think if you can connect the two, then that will really help, I think, broaden the area of research for Aboriginal people. So I do community-based research. I do research with Aboriginal women who are either living with HIV or women who are HIV negative. And all of these women have in common is they access services at the same organizations, which are my community partners and co-investigators on my research teams. So I decided to use the medicine wheel to present some of my challenges. And where I grew up in the East Coast, the medicine wheel was really important. And I actually use it as a tool now when I do my research in Toronto. And discussing it with women, the women felt really comfortable using this tool, and so that has been integrated into my work. So some of the challenges I have, the mental challenges, is reflexivity and reflection. So in my first slide, one of my first slides, I talked about who I am, and that is reflection. And something that's been a great challenge to me is reflexivity. And I'm sure that many Indigenous researchers are doing reflexivity without even putting the word reflexivity in front of it. And if you grow up in science, in basic science, you never really think about looking at the past. You're always sort of looking towards the future, and reflexivity was a big challenge for me because I look at myself in the mirror, and the person that I see in the mirror is the person that I think I am. But as a researcher, when you're working with Aboriginal people, if you can step out of your body and then look at yourself, is that really who I am? Are other people seeing the same thing as me? Are they seeing an Indigenous researcher? Or are they just seeing a basic scientist who wants to do research? And that was something that I found very challenging and difficult. And not just sort of trying to understand reflexivity, but just looking towards the past and seeing where am I from, and looking at the past, I can see, oh, there's so many gaps, and there's a lot of gaps because of the history of colonization, and the lack of our history in books, which I think was really important. And people mentioned the research process, which I actually find also quite challenging, is that the research process in academia is actually quite different from what you would expect from the research process in working with communities. And I learned that in academia, the outcome is at the end of the research process, and that's very important, and that's important to me. But when you're working with a community, there are many outcomes that you can reach throughout the whole research process. And I think that was something that, if you're working with institutions, they don't necessarily see that at first, that there's so many different learning points throughout the research process, and that you have to be able to sort of talk academics or talk your institution into recognizing those things. And I'm fortunate enough that I have a really great mentor who's a really great wordsmith as well. And before you know it, everybody's agreeing with her, and so is the institution. And so that's been really beneficial for me. And two-eyed seeing, I think regardless of who you are, once you step into academia, you're going to be doing two-eyed seeing. Because academia has a way of influencing you. Either it could be in a negative way or in a positive way. That's up to the individual. I see it as a positive way for me. I've certainly gained a lot of important tools. But it can be a challenge when you're working with a community, especially if you really want to work with elders, which I think is pretty critical in doing any kind of research. You want to get elders, you want to get youth, you want to get all different kinds of people involved in the research. And there are some people that see two-eyed seeing as a selling out. So you have to be comfortable with people looking at you and seeing that as selling out. You have to be maybe not comfortable, but you have to accept that. And that's something that I've accepted. It's something that I can't get rid of. It's inside of me. It's probably been inside of me before I even got to university. As a kid, I remember boiling water and putting the cover on and taking it off and wondering when it's going to boil faster if I keep it on, if I take it off. So that sort of science and that need for research has always been inside of me. And recognizing that we talk about two-eyed seeing, but there are multiple views. There's multiple views, and that's because Aboriginal people are not a homogeneous group of people. There's many ethnicities in Canada. I think that's a problem for some people. They don't recognize that Aboriginal people, you have First Nations, you have Métis, you have Inuit, but within each of those groups, you have so many other types of different types of groups and different ethnicities and different cultures, different views, different beliefs, and that's pretty critical. Differences in defining and understanding research is very challenging. It's challenging because you might have a specific understanding of research. As you go through academia, you understand research to be a certain thing. You understand community-based research to be a specific thing. But when you're talking with people, they might have a different understanding. So I think communication, which was mentioned, is critical. You have to talk about what your understanding of research is, and what your understanding of participatory action research or community-based research or even Indigenous research itself can have multiple definitions. And you have to be open to communicate and to talk about it and recognize that it's an iterative process, right? So it might change as you go along. You have to go back and then it'll change again, but you have to be open and willing to take that time to do that. Some of the physical challenges were relationships. I think when you're working with Aboriginal people, it's important to build relationships, and these are not simply working relationships that you're going to be building. So you grow quite close, actually, to many of your community partners, and over time they become mentors, and you don't even realize they're mentors until you're sitting at the table and you're reading a book. I was reading Research as Resistance, and I'm like, I don't know if I agree with everything that I'm reading here. I don't think I understand everything, and that's part of why I may not agree or may disagree, is because I do understand it. And having mentors was from the community was pretty critical. To be able to have those open discussions was priceless. Language and power. Someone spoke about how language was sort of equivalent to power, and when you're talking with a community, you have to make sure that how you're speaking is not sort of, the message isn't buried up in all of these technical words. That you can simply say the message, but just make it so that everybody can participate. And yeah, language is power, and it's pretty critical. And I don't think that I actually really recognized that at first. To me, even just writing a consent form, simple things like that, where you don't really realize how language is equal to power. How if you don't write an informed consent form that people are going to understand, then they're not making consent. There's no informed consent there, and I think that was a really important learning point. And here again, I had some really great mentors from the community who were able to provide a lot of feedback. And I think community advisory boards are really important, especially if you're using your community advisory boards. It's a tool, it's a resource, it's knowledge that you can access. It's people that are willing to contribute to your projects. It's people who can become co-investigators, who gain skills and tools, who can go on and move on to other people's projects and contribute in a similar manner where their expertise are recognized, and I think that's pretty critical. Deliverables. So deliverables. So when you're going into academia, what do people recognize? Publications and grants. And so that's important as an academic person. But for a community, the deliverables might not necessarily be the publications and the grant. So for a community, the deliverables can be that they participated in a research project and they've learned how to, a tool on how to manage stress. And this is a deliverable for that person, which they can go on into a community and then teach other people a stress management technique that might have been developed through a project. For example, in my work, I characterize, manage, and measure stress, and that's the whole bulk of my project. So the future of the study is to develop a culturally appropriate stress management approach or an intervention, as someone mentioned. And hopefully this intervention is something that women peers can apply. It's I'm hoping can actually be feasible. It's a deliverable. But as they're going through that process, they're participating in sharing circles. Some of the women are learning how to facilitate sharing circles. They're learning administrative skills that will help them have something that they can put on their CV, and they can participate in other research projects, taking part in different framework learning workshops, and it's all important. There's so many different deliverables throughout the project. It's just a matter of recognizing them and being creative. So the last one is spiritual. So I put learning and integrating, and I think for me this was a challenge. So I grew up in the East Coast, and we have a certain way of doing things, and I come to Toronto, and things are slightly different. The language is different. Even like I would even say that the Aboriginal people are different. Knowing that there are different kinds of Aboriginal people all over Canada, and I know this. But then experiencing it is something different when I've lived in this tiny little isolated community and I never really stepped out of it. So learning about other people's culture, even if it's not just like I'm Mi'kmaq, but learning about Cree culture, learning about Mohawks. So learning other people's culture, I think, is something that's really important. And also because I'm in Toronto, I have to learn to integrate. How do I add on other people's culture, but how do I make it the center point? And I think that's really important, to build your project around someone's culture as opposed to having the culture just be an add-on. And I think that's really important, and that's something that community can have helped me with a lot. Connecting views, I think that's all about learning and integrating as well. Connecting the views is pretty important, and it was something that I've learned how to do. Just talking to my community partners, I came to them with a specific project, and I left with a different project. and I think that was because I listened. And I may not have heard everything they wanted me to hear, but I continue to go back and I continue to listen, and then I'm learning how to connect their views, how to connect my views, how to talk to the women and see what they want out of a project, and I think that's really important, to connect everybody's views. You may not be able to accomplish everything you want, but if you can at least listen to people and take a little piece of what people want and build that into a project, and not just you building the project, but having everybody be a part of that process is important. So the last challenge is emotional. Doing ethical research. If you're working with a community and you've built relationships, at some point you're going to be asking yourself maybe, when people are talking to you, am I being ethical? Are they talking to me as a researcher, or are they talking to me as their friend? And I think sometimes when you're working with community, your feelings get into it a little bit too much maybe sometimes, or maybe just enough, or maybe not enough. And so doing ethical research, it can be very challenging, and there's also institutional guidelines on how to conduct ethical research, and even when you submit something to an RAB, they'll say things like, oh, you're the primary investigator, so you can't do this. You can't go to a meeting and do the informed consent. You have to have someone else do that. And then I'm thinking, well, I can't work with a community and then step out and then have a complete stranger go in and then do the research. I can't do that, because although it would be ethical from the point of view of academia and institutions, it wouldn't be ethical from the perspective of my community. They spent all of this time building a relationship with me, so they want to see me when I'm coming. So what is comfortable right at this moment in your research? And I think that's an important question that we all have to ask at some point in our research, and maybe some people ask that question on a daily basis. And right now, I feel okay in the research that I'm doing. I can see a lot of areas where I need to work on things, but I think continuously asking that question is pretty important. And then challenges is being able to overcome these challenges is difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's easier than others, but I think having mentors and people that you can talk to is really important. So some of my strategies and solution is reflexivity skills, is being able to have critical discussions with your peers is really important. Engaging new community partners. I do HIV research, so initially my community partners were agencies that deal with people who are living with HIV and provide services only to Aboriginal people who are living with HIV. But there are so many different community organizations in the area where I live that provide services to Aboriginal people. And one of these agencies is the Native Women's Resource Centre of Toronto, and they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. They have limited funds, they have limited staff, but they do everything from literacy to nutrition to childcare to just everything. And the women really respect the Native Women's Resource Centre, and so they've recently become a community partner. And what I've learned from engaging new partners is I have learned skills in how to write grants. So, and I think writing grants is something that you continuously learn how to become better at it. But you do have some skills. You have some skills to get at some money somewheres. And all your community partners, for me, what I've learned is that sometimes they need someone with the time, because they're so busy with other things, providing the services that they do, that they need someone to step in and maybe help them with that writing process. I mean, I'm not going to be a primary investigator on their grant or their funding applications, but I think Dr. Callan said it best when she said, when you help people, you inherently will feel a little better yourself, you know? And that felt really great that the community partner that I helped got a funding application to support one of their programs, and that felt really great for me. And of all the grants that I've received, which I haven't received all that many, that was probably the one that I felt the best about. I felt the best about it because I thought this is something that the results are going to happen every single day. When a woman is able to go in and get services that she needs, that's a result. So to me, that felt really great. And I have supportive research partners. I have supportive Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers. I have, so making the correct connections. So when you're building a network of researchers or you're building your own network, you have to, they might not always all get along, but they all have to understand that your work, where you're coming from and what you want to do. And I think that's critical that my research partners know sort of where I want to go, and that's because of constant communication. They're very open to different types of research as well. And research is challenging in general. I think everybody here can agree that research is challenging. It doesn't matter who you're doing the research with, but when you're doing research with people, maybe there's that extra challenge because you're working with people and you don't want to harm people. You want to make sure that there's something that they're going to benefit from in the end, and that throughout the research process there will be other deliverables, other outcomes for the community that you're working with. So Aboriginal health research is challenging. So part of my career and life path has that reflexivity, which is something that I recently really learned about, is really important for personal growth. I think being uncomfortable and to question your position in relation to a community and how they might see you and how you might think they perceive you is really important. Perspectives, looking at everybody's perspective and being aware that not everybody is going to see what you see as a solution to be a solution. And power. And defining relationships. So you might have multiple relationships, various working relationships, community partner relationships, all of these relationships. So you have to sort of, in the end, maybe you may not sit down and write out a definition for that relationship, but you have to understand that different people are going to look at you differently. They're going to see your relationship in a certain way, and to acknowledge that. And to make space for relationships to evolve, I think was a really important thing. So thank you.